Prologue. The last warning was ignored. The Galactic Council had always feared the humans. They were the first true Deathworlders to reach the stars, a species born from a world where everything either killed or evolved to survive. They had been patient. They had been merciful. And yet, time and time again, the galaxy mistook that mercy for weakness. The Sovereign Dominion was the last to make that mistake. It started with an ambush, one that should have never been attempted. Sovereign warships targeted an unarmed Terran colony convoy, slaughtering millions. The official council reports called it a regrettable miscalculation. The Sovereign called it a necessary purge. The humans called it the last mistake the galaxy would ever make. There were no peace talks. No warnings. No negotiations. Human fleets appeared over Sovereign worlds without broadcasting demands. They did not ask for terms. They did not seek surrender. They executed judgment. Sovereign capital cities burned under precise orbital strikes. Their fleets, once so proud, were reduced to glowing debris fields. Every outpost that had so much as supplied the ambush was reduced to nothing but empty dust. And then came the ground invasions. The galaxy had always whispered about what would happen if humans ever decided to stop holding back. The truth was worse than they had imagined. The Deathworlders had finally snapped. And they weren't playing games anymore. Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. The Galactic Council had always believed the Deathworlders, those terrifying creatures known as humans, were manageable. A species of warriors, yes, but also bound by rules, diplomacy, and their ridiculous sense of mercy. For centuries, the other species had pushed, tested, and prodded, expecting the humans to snarl but never bite. Until they snapped. It began with the Ourensuring purge of Epsilon Eridani 4. The Dominion of Ourensuring had claimed the colony was within their rightful expansion territory, despite the signed treaties. The attack came without warning. 17 million human lives were extinguished within hours. Orbital bombardment, bioweapons, and execution squads. The Galactic Council convened an emergency meeting, expecting to contain the fallout. They had vastly underestimated the storm they had unleashed. The humans did not protest to the Council. They did not send ambassadors. There were no negotiations. There was only retribution. A fleet emerged from the depths of Sol's military reserves, one that had not been seen in action for 1,000 years. The Terran Retribution Armada, once thought a myth, burned its way through Ourensuring space. The first world to fall, Vancari Prime, had once held a population of 2 billion. No distress signals escaped. No refugees made it past the blockade. All that remained was silence. The Council panicked. They pleaded, demanded, threatened. The humans never responded. They simply continued. And for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy learned what a Deathworlder's fury truly meant. Chapter 2. No More Mercy. The war was not a war.
It was not a conquest.
It was an extermination. The first fleets sent against the Terran Retribution Armada were wiped from existence within days. Ourensuring commanders, once confident in their numerical and technological superiority, found themselves overwhelmed. The humans fought with a precision and brutality that no civilized species could fathom. Theirs was not a campaign of victory, it was one of finality. Entire planets went dark. Supply lines were erased before they could be established. Orbital defenses were rendered useless by weapons never before seen in the galaxy. The humans had been holding back for centuries, allowing the galaxy to believe they were equals. Now, they made it clear. The Deathworlders were never equals. They had simply been patient. The broadcast that sent the galaxy into chaos came from a human commander, Admiral Elias Voss, his face cold and devoid of emotion. There will be no surrender. No negotiations. No mercy. You took our people from us. Now we take everything from you. The transmission ended, but the terror had just begun. The last remnants of the Ourensuring leadership abandoned their homeworld, believing they could hide among the other races, that the humans would not hunt them down to the last. They were wrong. From the outer rim to the core worlds, the humans did not stop. The fires of Epsilon Eridani 4 had become their war cry, and the stars themselves trembled under their wrath. Chapter 3. The Price of Defiance. The fleet hung in the void, a silent specter against the stars. Humanity had sent its response, not in words, not in warnings, but in the cold, efficient language of war. Admiral Helena Graves stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the tactical display. Enemy forces are regrouping near the 4th orbital plane, Lieutenant Kwan reported. Looks like they're consolidating after the first strike. Let them consolidate, Graves said, her voice like sharpened steel. It won't matter. Begin Phase 2. Across the system, human warships ignited their drives and surged forward. Missiles burned white-hot trails through the darkness. Kinetic rounds, moving at a fraction of light speed, carved through enemy hulls as if they were paper. The once mighty fleet that had come to subjugate humanity found itself prey to something far worse than it had ever imagined, a race that had learned too well from its wars, that had honed the art of destruction into something precise, relentless, and without mercy. On the surface of Vinthorus Prime, Sergeant Elias Carter moved through the ruins of what had once been an enemy command center. The bodies of the alien officers lay where they had fallen, their expressions frozen in a mixture of shock and horror. The battle had been swift. The humans had given no quarter. Sergeant, a voice crackled in his calm, we found something. Carter followed the signal to a bunker entrance, its doors breached by controlled demolitions. Inside, his men stood over a row of alien prisoners. Officers, scientists, strategists, the architects of the attempted conquest. Orders, one of his soldiers asked. Carter looked down at the kneeling aliens. He had read the reports, seen the footage of what their kind had done to human colonies. Entire populations wiped out, cities turned to glass. He felt no pity. They didn't offer mercy when they had the chance, Carter said. Neither do we. The sound of weapons discharging echoed through the bunker. Chapter 4. The End of Diplomacy. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The air in the vast chamber was thick with tension. Representatives from 100 species argued in hushed, frantic tones. At the center of it all stood Ambassador William Harlow, the human envoy. This is madness, the Shulian delegate hissed, mandibles clicking. You cannot exterminate an entire species over a war. Harlow's expression remained unreadable. And yet, when it was humanity's colonies burning, when our people screamed for aid, the council turned away. You let the Kvathi Empire believe we were weak. You let them come for us. Now, you expect us to show restraint. The Rolvec representative, a being of flowing bioluminescent tendrils, shifted uneasily. Retaliation is one thing, Ambassador Harlow. Genocide is another. Harlow leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of undeniable truth. We did not start this war, but we will finish it. And if any of you believe you can stop us, if you believe you can dictate the terms of our survival, then step forward. Make your stand. Silence fell over the chamber. None did. Humanity had made its position clear. There would be no mercy. No negotiations. Only retribution. Chapter 5. The Fires of Retribution. The silence of space was deceptive. It cloaked the movements of fleets, hid the whispers of war, and muffled the screams of those who realized, too late, that they had awakened something they could never put back to sleep. The Deathworlders had snapped. Admiral Kieran Voss stood on the bridge of the UNS Rathborn, humanity's latest dreadnought, its hull still bearing scars from the first wave of the war. Around him, a holographic display showed the enemy's forces. The Zalari Dominion, a once mighty empire that had made the mistake of underestimating humanity's patience. Sir, Lieutenant Darcy reported, voice tight with controlled rage. The Zalari are falling back. Their forces are in full retreat. Orders? Voss's jaw clenched. The Zalari had glassed the colony on New Avalon. 5 million souls, reduced to dust. There would be no mercy. Pursue and destroy, he said coldly. No survivors. The order rippled through the fleet like a thunderclap. The Deathworlder fleet surged forward, engines burning like hellfire. The Zalari, once so confident in their technological superiority, were now nothing more than prey. Chapter 6. No Sanctuary, No Escape. On the surface of Zalari Prime, the capital world of the Dominion, Chancellor Vrax trembled as reports came in. The humans weren't just winning, they were erasing everything in their path. Planets burned, warships shattered, entire sectors went dark, their distress calls silenced before they could even be answered. The humans, one of his advisors stammered, his crest flattened in fear. They refused to acknowledge surrender. Vrax felt his heart stutter. This was no longer a war. This was punishment. In orbit, the UNS Wrathborn loomed over Zalari Prime. On the bridge, Admiral Voss considered his options. The Zalari had committed atrocities beyond redemption, but it wasn't just vengeance that drove humanity now. It was the message, the warning. With a nod, Voss gave the final order. The bombardment began. Zalari Prime burned. Humanity had spoken. No mercy. No games. Only retribution. Chapter 7. The Iron Hand of Vengeance. The silence before the storm had passed. Now the Deathworlders raged. The war against the Galactic Concordance had been swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. The so-called civilized species had long underestimated humanity and its allies. When humanity finally snapped, their fury was like the collapse of a dying star, a wave of unstoppable force obliterating everything in its path. No more warnings. No more diplomacy. No more games. Admiral Vasquez stood aboard the bridge of the U.S. Revenant, watching as the remnants of the Concordance fleet attempted a desperate retreat. It was pathetic, really. These species, so used to their petty power plays and intricate politics, had never considered what might happen if humanity truly abandoned restraint. Status? Vasquez asked coldly. Their fleet is scattering, sir, Commander Lang reported. They're trying to warp out, but our interdiction fields are holding. They're trapped. Vasquez nodded. No survivors. Erase them. The command was executed without hesitation. The Revenant's main batteries flared, spears of white-hot energy tearing through the enemy fleet. Escape pods were targeted next, each lifeboat reduced to vapor in the cold abyss. Elsewhere, on the war-torn colony of Vibril 6, Captain Elias Cade led his shock troops through the shattered streets. The once proud city had become a graveyard. He stepped over the bodies of the alien soldiers who had once jeered at the suffering of human prisoners. Now, those same captors lay lifeless, their blood staining the dirt. Push forward, Cade ordered, his voice devoid of mercy. They started this war. We finish it. His troops moved with terrifying efficiency, purging the last remnants of enemy resistance. There were no pleas for surrender. None would be accepted. Chapter 8. The Fall of the Concordance. The Galactic Concordance had ruled for centuries. It would not survive the year. The core worlds burned as Deathworlder fleets advanced without pause. One by one, the great capitals of the galaxy were reduced to lifeless husks. Humanity had no interest in conquest, only retribution. On the ruined capital of Vortian Prime, Supreme Chancellor Virkila stood amidst the wreckage of his once glorious palace. His bodyguards lay dead around him. He had never believed this day would come. Never believed that the species his kind had ridiculed, enslaved, and tormented would rise to become executioners. He fell to his knees as the human warlord approached. General Helena Graves stood over him, her armor stained with blood and soot. Beg. Virkila trembled. Mercy. The shot rang out before he could finish. Graves turned to her soldiers. Burn the archives. Let their history die with them. And so, the Deathworlders wiped the slate clean. No mercy. No games. Only retribution. Chapter 9. The Unforgiving Tide. The blackened husk of the enemy fleet drifted through space, shattered remains of once mighty armadas, now nothing more than floating debris. The Deathworlders had struck with ruthless precision, and the war was no longer a contest. It was a slaughter. Captain Adrian Voss stood on the bridge of the Iron Fang, watching the remains of a Zelvari battleship spiral into the void. Reports flooded in from other Deathworlder fleets, all bearing the same message: victory after victory, system after system falling. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "Status on the next target?" he asked, voice as cold as the void. Commander Rhea Nix tapped at her console. "We have confirmed enemy fortifications in the Karath system. Heavy orbital defenses, multiple warship squadrons, and planetary shield generators. If they're making a stand, it'll be there." Voss nodded. "Then we break them there. No mercy. No games. Only retribution." The assault on Karath began with a planetary bombardment that turned the skies into a swirling inferno. Deathworlder warships fired kinetic slugs the size of city blocks, piercing through shields and defenses like they were made of paper. Orbital stations crumbled, and enemy squadrons scrambled in a desperate attempt to counterattack. On the surface, the Zelvari military command panicked. Their transmissions were filled with pleas for reinforcements, but none were coming. The Deathworlders had ensured that every relay, every supply line, every escape route was severed. Then, the ground invasion began. Legions of heavily armored soldiers descended from orbit, their drop pods slamming into enemy lines with earth-shaking force. The Zelvari, once arrogant in their superiority, realized too late that they had underestimated the fury of Deathworlders. These were not diplomats, not conquerors. These were executioners. Sergeant Dorian Cade led his squad through the ruined streets, plasma fire scorching the air around them. A Zelvari ambush had pinned them down, but Deathworlders thrived in the chaos of war. Suppressing fire, Cade roared, and his team responded with brutal efficiency. The enemy position was torn apart in seconds. Cade moved in, stepping over the mangled remains of what had once been proud Zelvari warriors. Their desperation was clear in the way they fought, not with the discipline of an organized military, but the reckless abandon of those who knew they were already dead. A transmission crackled through his comms. "Sergeant Cade, we've breached the planetary command bunker. The Zelvari governor wants to surrender." Cade smirked, raising his rifle. "Tell him surrender isn't on the table." Chapter 10. No more warnings. The Deathworlders didn't take prisoners. Not anymore. Governor Zelfer of Karath stood before Admiral Varian Locke, trembling as he pleaded for the lives of his people. "Please, we yield. We surrender. We acknowledge your superiority. Just spare us." Locke's expression was unreadable. "Spare you? Like you spared the colonies of Eldrisfor? Like you spared the civilians of Jericho Prime? No, Governor. You set the rules of this war when you butchered our worlds. Now we're finishing it." He raised his sidearm and fired. The governor collapsed, lifeless before he hit the floor. Locke turned to his officers. "Purge every last one of them. This system is ours now." Across the galaxy, the Deathworlder war machine advanced without pause, without hesitation. No longer constrained by morals or diplomacy, they did what had to be done. World after world fell, their enemies crushed beneath an unrelenting tide of vengeance. The Zelvari coalition, once an empire that had ruled with an iron fist, was reduced to ruins in mere months. Their remaining leaders scrambled to flee, seeking asylum in neutral territories. But there was no escape. Admiral Locke stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final Zelvari capital world burn beneath him. His hands clenched into fists. "This is what happens when you push Deathworlders too far," he muttered. A transmission came through. "Sir, the last Zelvari warlord is requesting terms. He's willing to surrender unconditionally." Locke exhaled slowly.
No.
No more warnings. No more mercy. End them. The order was carried out without hesitation. The war was over. And the galaxy would never forget what happened when the Deathworlders finally snapped. Chapter 11. The battlefield was no longer a place of skirmishes and cautious engagements. It had become a charnel house, a place where the Deathworlders had abandoned all restraint. The Galactic Coalition had never seen anything like it before. The humans no longer fought for survival. They fought for vengeance. General Caldrex of the Vorthan Dominion stood in stunned silence inside his command center, watching the horror unfold on the holographic display before him. Every defensive line, every fortification, Every fallback position meticulously planned over decades, swept aside as if they were made of dust. The humans did not just break through, they annihilated everything in their path. "Report," he barked, but his officers were pale, their mandibles clicking anxiously. "Sir, the 7th, 12th, and 14th fleets have been destroyed. The human forces are advancing at an impossible rate." "Impossible?" Caldrex repeated, narrowing his 6 eyes. "Are you telling me the humans have found a way to cheat physics?" "No, sir, they're simply pushing forward without fear. They ignore losses, they do not stop to fortify. They move like a storm, consuming all in their path." Caldrex turned his attention back to the map. Worlds that had once been key strongholds of the Coalition were now marked in red, signifying human control. This was not a war of attrition anymore. The humans had nothing left to lose. On the surface of Cestus Prime, Captain Adrian Vasquez led her squad through the ruins of a once great alien city. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burnt metal and flesh. The streets were littered with bodies, some human, many alien. Her armor was scratched, her face smeared with dirt and blood, but her eyes burned with a singular purpose. "Push forward," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her soldiers moved with machine-like precision, their training and hatred fueling them beyond their limits. They were no longer fighting for orders. They were fighting because there was no other option left. A Zalvath warrior, towering and monstrous, roared as it charged at Vasquez. It had once been a nightmare on the battlefield, its species known for their brutality. But humanity had outmatched brutality with something far worse. Vasquez fired 3 times. The first shot took out its knee. The second punched through its armored chest. The third shattered its skull. She stepped over the corpse and kept moving. "Clear the sector. Leave nothing standing." Chapter 12. The Galactic Coalition was collapsing. Their desperate attempts to negotiate had been met with silence. No terms would be accepted. No surrenders acknowledged. The humans had given them a chance before. That time had passed. In orbit above the former capital world of the Coalition, the human flagship Retribution prepared its final assault. Admiral Holt stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the last remnants of the Coalition's fleet attempt a futile stand. "They're still fighting," one of his officers muttered. "They must know it's hopeless." "They fight because they fear what we will do to them," Holt said, his voice cold. "They should be afraid." With a nod, he gave the order. The fleet opened fire, massive kinetic rounds and high-yield warheads turning the once proud defenses of the Coalition into debris. The enemy's capital ships tried to retaliate, but human vessels had adapted beyond their expectations. Faster, deadlier, more relentless. On the surface, the Coalition's ruling council huddled in their bunker. Chancellor Vornox trembled as he watched the sky burn. "They won't stop," he whispered. "They won't stop until we are all dead. They are monsters," one of his aides sobbed. "We should have never provoked them." "No," Vornox said, shaking his head. "We made them into this." The last transmission from the bunker was intercepted by the human forces before the city was engulfed in fire. The war was over. But the Retribution had only just begun. Chapter 13. The Iron Fist Descends. The cold silence of space was shattered by the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet. Warships, dark as the void itself, emerged from slipstream travel, their engines glowing like embers of an unrelenting inferno. The time for warnings, negotiations, and diplomacy had long passed. This was Retribution. The enemy, the so-called Unified Galactic Council, had grown complacent in their centuries of domination. They had not expected the primitive, war-born Deathworlders to evolve so quickly. They had believed that crushing a few scattered colonies would break their will. They were wrong. As soon as the fleet reached the orbit of the primary enemy stronghold, the bombardment commenced. Orbital kinetic strikes rained down upon the planet, carving deep craters into military installations, annihilating command centers, and turning once proud cities into smoldering ruins. The screams of the enemy, transmitted over intercepted communications, were met with cold silence. There would be no mercy, only destruction. On the bridge of the Wrath of Terra, Admiral Kieran Vale observed the devastation with grim satisfaction. Deploy the ground forces. Burn them out. Leave nothing standing. Dropships descended like fiery meteors, unleashing legions of heavily armed Deathworlder troops. Their armor was scarred from countless battles, their weapons engineered for maximum efficiency, and their purpose was singular: annihilation. The enemy's defenses were pitiful in comparison. Their plasma turrets barely scratched the Deathworlder exo-armor. Their soldiers, frail and desperate, broke the moment the first wave of invaders hit the ground. As the battle raged, Captain Celine Ardent led her squad through the ruins of a once great citadel. Their objective was clear: the capture of supreme strategist Kvaris, the mastermind behind the atrocities committed against Deathworlder colonies. They found him cowering in a reinforced bunker, surrounded by trembling guards. They did not waste time. One of Celine's men blasted the doors open, and within seconds, Kvaris was dragged out, his eyes wide with fear. "Please," he choked out. "We can negotiate. We can." Celine's armored gauntlet struck his face, silencing him. "You had your chance. Now you answer for your crimes." With the enemy leadership captured, the battle ended in hours. The fortress world fell. The Deathworlders did not celebrate. This was not victory. This was justice. And it was far from over. Chapter 14: Blood Price Paid in Full. The fall of the stronghold sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The once mighty unified Galactic Council, who had enslaved and oppressed Deathworlders for generations, realized the true cost of their arrogance. The Deathworlders were not mere savages to be subdued. They were the executioners of a reckoning long overdue. The interrogation of Kvaris revealed the location of the Council's last great bastion, Vexor Prime, the seat of their empire. It was a world of luxury, untouched by war, its people ignorant of the suffering inflicted upon Deathworlders. That ignorance would end. The fleet arrived in a storm of fire and vengeance. Unlike previous battles, there was no warning shot, no demand for surrender. The bombardment was immediate, precise, and devastating. The orbital stations, once gleaming symbols of dominance, were torn apart like paper. The planetary shields held for mere minutes before being overloaded by relentless kinetic bombardment. The Council's elite guards scrambled to defend their home, but it was futile. On the ground, chaos reigned. Civilians screamed in terror as Deathworlder forces marched through the streets. Some begged for mercy. Others tried to flee. None succeeded. The Deathworlders were not there to occupy. They were there to erase. Celine Ardent and her squad moved through the opulent halls of the Grand Council chambers, stepping over the bodies of fallen guards. The doors burst open, revealing the remaining council members huddled together in fear. "Please, we surrender," one of them wailed. Celine's rifle did not waver. "You think surrender absolves you? How many of our people begged for mercy while you watched them burn? How many of our children cried out while you enslaved them?"
No.
There is no surrender. Only justice. One by one, the council members fell, their blood staining the marble floors. Outside, the Deathworlder flag was raised over the ruins of Vexor Prime. The galaxy bore witness to the new order. The era of Deathworlder subjugation was over. The era of Deathworlder dominion had begun. Chapter 15: Scorched Earth. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. The city of Zalvoran, once a stronghold of the Galactic Dominion, was now a battleground. Human warships loomed overhead, their railguns and plasma cannons reducing entire city blocks to rubble. On the ground, armored infantry advanced with ruthless efficiency, their exoskeleton suits allowing them to crush alien resistance like insects beneath their boots. Sergeant Adrian Cole led his fire team through the ruined streets, stepping over charred corpses and shattered infrastructure. The Zalvorans had pleaded for mercy. They received none. Mercy had died with the billions of human lives lost when the Dominion declared Earth a liability, launching their genocidal campaign. Now there was only retribution. "Cole, we've got hostiles ahead, barricaded position," Lieutenant Vasquez reported through the comms. "Thermal scans show 20, maybe more." Cole signaled for his team to take cover. The Dominion soldiers had fortified a government compound, their last stand in the city. Bring up the breaching charges. We end this. A moment later, an explosion rocked the compound's entrance. Humans stormed inside, guns blazing. The Dominion forces, mostly insectoid Krillin AR and reptilian Zephyrians, fought desperately but were outmatched. Within minutes, the building was cleared. Survivors were executed without hesitation. As Cole wiped the blood from his visor, an incoming transmission crackled in his earpiece. This is Admiral Hart. The Dominion fleet has reinforced the sector. We are deploying orbital bombardment. Pull your men out. Cole smirked. Acknowledged, Admiral. Let it burn. As they retreated, the night sky lit up with fire. Massive kinetic rods and antimatter bombs rained down, erasing the last vestiges of Dominion control. Zalvoran was no more. Chapter 16, No Way Out. On the bridge of the UHS Retribution, Admiral Sarah Hart watched the holographic display. The Dominion fleet had arrived, 3 dreadnoughts and an armada of support ships. She leaned forward, her voice calm yet deadly. Prepare for engagement. All ships, weapons free. The battle erupted in a fury of light and destruction. Human warships, smaller but far more advanced, darted through the Dominion lines, weaving between enemy fire and launching precise, devastating strikes. Railguns tore through enemy hulls like paper, and swarms of AI-guided missiles overwhelmed their defenses. On the Dominion flagship, High Chancellor HFY watched in horror as his fleet was dismantled. This is impossible. They are savages. How are they winning? His second-in-command, a quivering Vortari officer, stammered, Sir, they fight with no restraint. They do not take prisoners. Our forces are breaking. Then surrender. Send a message. Offer terms. But as the transmission was sent, the response was immediate and brutal. The Retribution's main cannon fired, a concentrated energy beam slicing through the Dominion flagship like a knife through flesh. HFY barely had time to scream before his ship erupted in a blinding explosion. Admiral Hart exhaled. There are no negotiations. Only justice. With the Dominion's command structure obliterated, the remaining ships attempted to flee. They did not get far. Humanity pursued them, ensuring none survived. As the last Dominion vessel was reduced to drifting wreckage, Hart gave the final order. Send a message to the surviving Dominion worlds. We are coming. There will be no mercy. The war was far from over. But humanity had made its message clear. Retribution had only just begun.